All right, welcome everybody. I wanted to pop on for two reasons. One is just to remind you that I have a free training coming up. I have a free training, just to reemphasize, I have a free training coming up on Wednesday and Thursday of this week on changing negative self-talk. And I thought I would share a couple of moments in which I learned a little bit more about how I could use self-talk intentionally, right? Whereas for the most part, our thoughts kind of happen to us, and we're more passive victims, frankly, of our programming of the past. And these are three moments that I realized that I could intentionally think on purpose. I could intentionally think on purpose to produce a very specific result. So the first time that this happened to me, many, many years ago, hi, whoever you are who are watching, go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know who you are. The new Facebook API, by the way, is a little bit strange. We used to be able to see who was watching, but now things have changed. In any case, so the first time I realized that I could intentionally make an intervention with my self-talk to produce a specific result was in a sales context. So I knew very early on that I was going to be a coach, that I was going to help people with their mindset, change limiting beliefs, etc. And I also knew that that meant I had to learn sales. I knew that I had to learn how to sell. I just knew that is one of those skills in life that you have to develop, right? We're always selling, whether or not you're in sales. The person who's more influential, whether that's the parent who can influence their kids to go to school and read and do all those things, or the drug dealer on the corner, the person who can influence that child the most is the one who's ultimately going to be responsible for their quality of life. Jessica, good morning. Welcome. So self-talk, right? In a sales situation. So here I am. I had joined Honda of Santa Monica because I thought here's a good container for me to learn sales in a very difficult sales environment. For those of you who don't know, car sales in 2020 are not the easiest things to do. Okay, and that's a whole story for another reason. But I was in the back of a Honda Civic. I had two clients in the front seat test driving the car. And I realized in that moment that this was the perfect car for them. Great car, great price. And I caught myself thinking, they're not going to want the car. They're going to think it's too expensive. They're going to this, they're going to that. And in that moment, that awareness actually allowed me to step back, look at the thoughts that I was having. And in that moment, something flipped for me where I said, no, I'm going to sell them this car. And from that moment on, when I stepped back into Powerful Earl, welcome. From that moment on, when I stepped back into my body, I started giving myself positive, solution-oriented suggestions, right? Earl just did a post on his Facebook page about the power of words and the power of suggestibility. And we are most suggestible to ourselves. And we don't really realize how often we're giving ourselves negative suggestions in business and sales, right? So earlier I'm saying they're not going to want this. It's going to be too expensive. They're going to go to another dealership. And as long as I'm saying that to myself, I cannot communicate in a way that's going to sell the product in the first place. So I shifted and I immediately began to change, and I immediately began to say, sell the car. They're going to love this. This is the perfect car for them. This is the best opportunity. And I start to create that tape loop. And what was interesting is that all of a sudden, I started to change in the interaction. I heard myself communicating to them differently. I started saying things that was like, you guys are going to love this. Notice that about the car. And I started to notice that the entire way in which I showed up transformed. Long story short, they did end up buying the car. And what I learned is that if I use my self-talk in a positive, solution-oriented way, I can program myself for better performance. That was the first thing that I learned. Second way that I use self-talk now. Second thing that completely transformed my relationship to my internal dialogue, by the way, the self-talk training, if you're interested in it, is Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, so you're going to want to DM me or comment to get access to the training. The second thing that I learned was how to actually turn off internal dialogue altogether for flow state. Okay, so we all know what flow is. Flow is when you get so absorbed in an activity that everything else kind of disappears. You're so absorbed in the activity. And this is so important because when we're in flow, that's where we actually get the best performance out of ourselves. And one of the things that knocks us out of flow is negative internal dialogue. Talking to ourselves too much takes us out of the moment. And there's a great passage in the book Transforming Yourself by Steve Andreas, in which he talks about negotiating with your internal critic. And you can actually go inside, have a dialogue, literally, with your internal dialogue. You can dialogue with it and negotiate a time for feedback. So if you have a negative internal critic, if you go before the event where you want to have flow, you can actually negotiate with yourself to have the voice be quiet during your peak performance event and then give you feedback before and after the event. The first time this happened to me, I was on a group coaching call and I had asked my negative internal dialogue to essentially shut up for the duration of the call and let me be totally in the zone. And it actually gave me a lot of resistance. And what it taught me was all of the things it was trying to protect me from. And so once I wrote all those things down and I did what I could do to fix those things, and the things I couldn't fix, I just released. Then I asked that internal dialogue if it would be quiet. And I started the call, and then at the end of the call, I popped out of flow. And I was like, oh my God, I was in a complete flow state for the last 90 minutes. And it was bizarre. It was so bizarre to be able to turn it on just like that, right? The third thing that I've done that has transformed my relationship with my internal dialogue is to take that internal critic and to actually coach it to become constructive. So typically our negative thought loops are usually the same old phrases over and over and over again, replayed on repeat. And this is not particularly useful. We're unfortunately not that creative in how we criticize ourselves. How I've criticized myself in the past is I would say things to myself like, oh, shiitake mushroom, right? Oh, Shazam, you're going to F it up. That was my negative self-talk, right? And this, I didn't realize it, but this negative self-talk was always there in the background whenever I was about to do something important to me. And be like, oh, Shazam! You know it wasn't Shazam, right? Self-talk is not necessarily PG. Oh, Shazam! You're going to flabbergast it up real good. And the tonality of it, it was literally screaming at me. Like screaming at me. And when you become aware of it, number one, you're like, oh my God, I've actually been talking to myself this way in the first place. And that awareness, number one, is huge. And then Elena says, I have the feeling you were talking about me. I think we all have this to a degree. And then I started to teach it because it wants me to do really well. That negative internal critic wants me to perform well. So I started to teach. I was like, well, what specifically am I going to screw up? And then it goes, well, you need to make sure you do this, this, and this. And I was like, okay, well, instead of telling me, oh, Shazam, you're going to flabbergast it up real good. Instead of that, could you state it to me in the positive? Do this, say that, feel this, instead of saying you're going to screw it up. And that completely shifted my relationship to the negative internal dialogue, the negative critic. Now it is a constructive critic, okay? So these are three things, only three, by the way. It does not stop here. There is an infinite amount of opportunity for you to speak to yourself in ways that light you up, make you feel confident, motivated, determined, creative, make you incredible at problem solving, right? you have to get intentional about it. And that's really what this training is about, is beginning for you to become intentional about what you're saying to yourself. All right. So if you're interested in the training, I'm really kind of blown away by the response. There's a ton of people in the training right now. If you are interested in the training, it is on Wednesday and Thursday. You're going to want to message me for the specific times, and you'll get access to the training. We're going to be working with some of your negative internal dialogue, teaching you how to shift it for your specific goals, for your specific outcomes. And at that point, we'll also do some belief work to help really deepen the changes for you. All right. Happy Monday. Let me know if you want to join us for the training.